Well, it's not exactly what I had in mind, but it's just a little tiny tribute to some musical thing towards for the people that fought at D-Day, because now, it's this time of year, and I'm not the most patriotic person in the world, and at all, by any means. I grew up during the Vietnam War, and that was a bitter war, and divided a lot of people, and I had this country not gotten involved in that war, I think my life and a lot of people's lives would have been much different, whether they fought in that war or not. I think it drove a lot of people, and it really, just like kind of like now, two different worlds of America. But anyway, even different then. But whatever. My point is that there. I watched something. The reason I did this was because I watched something. 60 Minutes Rewind. I think from 2004 with Andy Rooney. And if there's a chance that you guys can see that, he reflects on D-Day. He was one of the people that went to the beach 4 days after it, after the initial landings. And that's, when it wasn't as hot as the first or second day. But what he describes, that's just unreal. I mean, it's unreal. And I know that veterans and civilians don't always agree on principles, but those are the guys, that are the soldiers are the guys that get sent there. Some believe in it, some are just trying to survive. Personally, I don't think I would not have gone to Vietnam. I won't say I won't think. I would not have gone to Vietnam. I don't believe in it. I didn't believe in it then. I don't believe in it 50 years later. I think it was a rotten, crummy war, and over 56,000 of our people died in it. No, not to mention countless of Vietnamese. And they still serve Kentucky Fried Chicken, and McDonald's is going just fine from what I hear in Ho Chi Minh City. That they were trying to keep Saigon. So yeah, that's a bitter war, but World War II is different. And what Rooney describes is incredible. So I highly advise everybody, or anybody that cares about, idea of what these people did, what these young, unbelievable kids did. You know, they put their lives on the line for the people that came after them. It was, like Rooney said, one of the few complete acts of unselfish behavior that the world has created. And it was Americans, English, and Canadians, and they fought to take back a whole continent that Hitler had taken over, Hitler and his armies. And I lived in Holland. I knew my girlfriend, her neighbor, when they were growing up on the farm, they were what they call NSB people. There was a Dutch Nazi party. And those people, those kids had lots of problems, with that. And still, 40 years later, after the D-Day invasions, the first time it was in Europe was 40 years after that, those invasions in Belgium. And my dad's cousin's son, Andre Piron, was named after a resistance fighter. And then 15 years, let's see, 14 years after that, um, 14 years, 5 years after that, 5 years after that, I moved there, and I got to know a little bit more of the reality of that, a teeny tiny bit of what it may have been like. I mean, just a tiny, tiny bit. Uh, but I'm just saying that it was people were, there were more veterans still alive then, is what I'm saying. I worked with people in New Orleans that were, people thought over there. It was just part of my life. My parents were, uh, my mom was a speech therapist nurse in Oklahoma, at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, a place called Chickasha, Oklahoma, and my dad was our patient, who he had been a reconnaissance photographer, taking pictures of cannons up over in Colorado, and his hearing got really bad because he didn't provide any, you know, hearing aid type stuff. I mean, he had to wear hearing aid once he got to Fort Sill, but Anyway, it was very. I grew up with this guy who couldn't hear hardly anything. He was a piano player, an artist, piano player, photographer, made his living taking pictures. It was very frustrating for him. Had he not gotten deaf, though, he maybe would have been killed on the beaches in Italy. I don't know. My girlfriend's father, he was from Sicily. He's passed away now, but he, as a kid, walking over dead German soldiers. I mean, people of my generation just reflect on. We kind of know a little bit about it from the people before us. And anyway, if you have a chance, watch that Andy Rooney thing. If you don't know any, if you don't see or care to or whatever anything else about D-Day, it wasn't also just the countries that the Germans occupied. They freed Germany so that the Germans could uh, create a better life. Now I don't know why this war had to happen again after the First World War. I have questions about the Versailles Treaty, which was coincidentally the last place I played at professionally with RL was the University of Versailles, which is where that treaty was signed. Well, that area. Anyway, that was in '94. But I knew RL till he passed away in 2005. We were pretty tight. But that's not what this is about. This is about D-Day and the soldiers that gave up their lives and the people that got injured forever and the families that it affected all over the world. And we're talking Europe in this case. The Japanese War kept on going, of course, till a few more months. But the whole thing about the atomic weapons that they used. I can say that one American vet that from World War II, a man that I visited his son. It's American in Italy, and we were talking uh, about. He said he'd been to the coast of Japan, or they went to Japan after the occupation, and he said he knew that if those atomic bombs hadn't been blasted over Japan, that he would have been a dead man. There wouldn't have been any kids from him. There wouldn't have been anything of him because the Japanese apparently, he said, were that fanatical, and that they were not going to let it go down easy. That would have been a really bad deal. So most people, a lot of people didn't like those atomic bombs, and who does like an atomic bomb? But all I can say is Ralph Goodman. That's what I heard from Ralph Goodman, that he would have been a dead man if they hadn't been for that. It's just funny how you hear little bits and phrases from individual people, soldiers and different folks, and all you can do is put a little piece of their story together with the rest of the huge event, and try to figure out something that makes sense. We were on a trailways bus in the south side of Chicago, and a little guy got on, a white guy, because we were in a black part of town, and an RL was black, and I was white. But anyway, the point is that we were in a black part of town on a trailways bus. He comes on with this box, and we started to talk. He'd been a waist gunner on B-17 or B-24 in Europe during the war. And we were pretty tired. It was late night, and but all I remember really about this guy is saying, and his face, kind of voice fading, and his, kind of like drifting back into that time. And he goes, it's a terrible thing. Terrible thing. I can't even imagine what he'd seen, blasting German fighters out of the sky, or being seen as people dying in planes. Anyway, all those of us that can reflect like this have the luxury of making YouTube videos. Maybe you can take a minute and just be grateful for all those that gave us that opportunity. For all those, like that little white man that got on the bus in Southside Chicago and told me what a terrible thing being a waist gunner on an American bomber in World War II was. For my uncle who fought in Europe, for my dad who lost his hearing, for my mom who was a speech therapist in Oklahoma and helped people with burned up faces and throats and being able to learn how to speak again, and somehow explain to them that their girlfriends and wives were no longer wanted to be with them because they couldn't deal with it. Things like that. The people that suffered, that gave us all a chance to do what we do now in 2023. Okay, everybody have a fine day and evening, night, morning, wherever you're at. So long.